Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Katy, Texas. Monday, January 11th, 1999. Patrol units respond to a single-family home after a 911 call reports a possible break-in. The house is secured, movement is restricted, and the primary bedroom is cleared. Inside the master closet, officers locate the victim, Belinda Temple, 30, a local school teacher in her third trimester of pregnancy. She is unresponsive with injuries consistent with a single, close-range shotgun discharge. No firearm is recovered anywhere in the residence. Scene conditions are documented before interpretations begin. The back door glass is shattered. High-value items, jewelry, electronics, remain in place. Several drawers are open, but do not show the random spill typical of a hurried theft. There are no signs of prolonged ransacking. These observations establish the baseline: forced entry present, valuables present, weapon absent, victim located in the master bedroom closet. One scene only, one lethal act. Victimology is opened immediately because it narrows the investigative field without presuming an outcome. Belinda Temple is described by colleagues as punctual and orderly. Lesson plans are current, classroom materials are prepped. Home indicators, nursery items staged, appointments up to date, reflect a pregnancy approaching term. Those details matter to investigators. They verify last known normal activity and help bind the timeline. In towns like Katy, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The opening hours prioritize containment and preservation over conclusions. Entry logs record every person crossing the threshold. Photographs capture the closet geometry, door frame, shelving, and sightlines. A rough sketch fixes the victim's position relative to fixed points that will not move when memories do. Evidence technicians collect what can be lifted without disturbing trajectory work. Statements are taken but not graded. Cadence and emotion are observations, not verdicts. Working hypotheses are recorded in neutral language. The broken glass may represent true forced entry, or it may be staged. The absence of missing valuables complicates a simple burglary narrative. The lack of a recovered firearm limits immediate tracing options. None of those lines alone decide the case. They form a platform for what follows: wound characteristics, pellet and wadding analysis, time of death estimation, and a drive time model testing whether any person could have created and exited this scene within the available window. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. What cannot change from this point forward is locked here. Belinda Temple is the victim. The location of fatal injury is the master bedroom closet. The mechanism is a single contact range shotgun blast. The weapon is not recovered. The back door glass is shattered. Valuables are left behind. Any theory, regardless of who it favors, must align with these fixed points or be discarded. This is not narration for effect. It is procedure to protect accuracy. Belinda Temple is not a symbol in this case file. She is the center of it. 30 years old, a public school teacher in Katy, Texas, 8 months pregnant, known for order, punctuality, and showing up prepared. When investigators begin, they do what works in every homicide with domestic proximity: build a precise, bias-free victimology, and lock the last known normal. That means documenting routine, responsibilities, and any deviation from what colleagues and family expected on January 11th, 1999. It also means resisting shortcuts. Reliability can't be assumed. It has to be verified. The school side comes first because it is structured. Attendance rolls, lesson plans, substitute procedures, and end-of-day checkouts give a clean view of whether anything about her workday signaled disruption. Staff and administrators provide statements about recent behavior: on time, no disciplinary issues, classroom materials current, upcoming leave plans in place for the birth. This isn't sentiment. It is workflow evidence that narrows the time window and reduces noise. A teacher closing out a day normally is stronger than a neighbor's impression of everything seemed fine. The point is to establish what Belinda did reliably, not what anyone thought she might have done. Home indicators follow in the same disciplined way. Investigators note the status of nursery items, scheduled appointments, and ordinary preparations that align with an imminent due date. The goal is to maintain a clear baseline of a life in motion: meals, mail, calendars, packaging, and routine errands, without drawing conclusions from any single item. In towns like Katy, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. Practically, that matters during canvasses. When normal life collapses, people remember small things. A postal worker recalls a delivery pattern. A neighbor recalls whether a porch light was on. These are not dramatic, but they anchor time. Parallel to that, case agents build a contact map. Who reliably interacted with Belinda that day and in the weeks prior? The list is limited to direct, documentable interactions: school staff, close friends, immediate family. Each contact is assessed for proximity, purpose, and timing. Statements are logged in neutral language. Words like seemed, felt, and probably are flagged, not for blame, but because they add uncertainty that needs hard corroboration. If an observation changes the time window by even 5 minutes, it earns more attention. If it adds only speculation, it gets parked until physical evidence demands it. From a procedural standpoint, this stage also screens for routine stressors that could matter later: financial concerns, health appointments, upcoming school obligations, or disputes. No one is assigning motive here. The exercise is narrower. Identify pressures that could alter routine. A missed appointment means more than a rumor. A confirmed appointment kept on time reduces window size. Everything is measured against the fixed points already established at the scene. Nothing about that scene is relitigated here. The human cost is acknowledged without turning the record into a eulogy. Colleagues describe Belinda as steady. Parents recognize a teacher who ran a classroom without surprises. The value of that detail is practical. A steady person creates steady data. When a steady pattern breaks, detectives know where to look first. That is how you achieve clarity in a case that will later be argued over for years, by removing what is uncertain and preserving what is provable. You will hear this principle again because it keeps investigations honest. Before suspect models, build the person's model. Victimology isn't a side note or a tribute video. It is an investigative tool that exposes timelines that make sense and discards timelines that don't. It also prevents tunnel vision. When you understand the real routine, you stop chasing theories that ignore it. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Here, too clean will be tested by science in the next segment, not by opinion. If you are watching with a critical eye, ask yourself what you would need to see to accept or reject a burglary explanation at this stage, without reusing any scene facts already in evidence. Most viewers will list the same items detectives list: trajectory, range, ammunition type, and whether the room geometry supports what's been claimed. That is why the next step is laboratory-driven. The closet, the wound, and the dispersal characteristics will talk. The question is whether they agree with any narrative presented later, by anyone. The next phase leaves impressions at the door and lets the measurable facts speak. Scene technicians and medical examiners take the lead. Their mandate is narrow: define the shot, define the position, define the window of time. No theories, no shortcuts. Inside the primary bedroom closet, the physical layout is recorded before anything moves. Shelving height, door swing, the distance from threshold to back wall, and the vertical position of visible impact are fixed in photographs and measurements. Trajectory rods and stringing establish a basic path of travel. The patterning and impact height point to a muzzle above the wound path with the victim low to the floor, consistent with a kneeling or near-kneeling position at the moment of discharge. That observation is not guesswork, it's geometry. It also locks the single-scene rule this case must honor from start to finish. The lethal event occurred inside this closet. Range determination comes next. The wound characteristics and material deposited at the margin are consistent with a contact-range shotgun discharge. That alone has 3 implications investigators consider early. There is virtually no intermediate distance error to argue over. The shot was delivered at point-blank range, and the scene likely contains no secondary pellet strike outside the closet that would indicate a miss or an earlier shot. Consistent with that, technicians do not identify multiple impact zones. One discharge, one result. Ammunition analysis focuses on what's recoverable. Buckshot is confirmed. Investigators document plastic wadding recovered at the scene, consistent with a 12-gauge hunting load. Its presence matters because wadding behavior helps anchor distance and sometimes brand family. The exact manufacturer is not the point here. The type is. For a jury years later, that distinction will matter more than marketing names. What also matters is what's missing: the firearm. No shotgun is recovered in the house or immediately surrounding areas. That absence limits on-scene tracing and pushes the investigation toward purchase histories, known owners in the circle, and any reports of access to similar weapons. The closet surfaces are surveyed for residue and patterning that would contradict the emerging reconstruction. None do. There is no second impact, no outlier strike that would support a struggle or a moving discharge through the home. The enclosure itself, small, predictable, favors certainty. The more confined the space, the fewer places the data can hide. From the larger room outward, the fake break-in thesis gets its first scientific test. Glass distribution at the back door and fracture characteristics are evaluated against a typical exterior strike. Investigators note deviations from the pattern they expect to see when an intruder forces entry from outside. This is not proof standing alone, but it is consistent with the hypothesis that forced entry was staged to mislead. That conclusion, if it stands, would not be an opinion. It would be a physical reading of directionality and dispersion. For now, it remains a line item to be weighed alongside everything else. The medical examiner's office documents cause of death as a single close-range shotgun wound to the head. Manner of death is homicide. Fetal demise is secondary to maternal death. There is no independent fatal injury to the unborn child. Post-mortem changes, lividity, rigor, and organ temperatures are assessed not to lock down an exact minute, but to produce a reasonable interval. That interval aligns with an afternoon window on January 11, 1999. The point is not to fix a timestamp. It is to give investigators a bracket they can test with movement, receipts, and witness observations in the next phase. Chain of custody is emphasized in every step, and for a reason. This case will span decades of argument, multiple trials, and appellate review. The only way an evidence record survives that long is if the paperwork is clean and the handling is disciplined. Each item, wadding, swabs, clothing, pellets, is bagged, sealed, and logged with time, date, and handler identity. Each signature is a promise that the story told in court later will be the same story the closet told on day one. 2 cautions are placed in the file to keep analysis honest. First, contact range proves proximity, not identity. It tells us how, not who. Second, a likely kneeling position proves victim posture at discharge, not the reason for it. In some homes, the posture could be voluntary. In others, it could be compelled. The closet cannot answer that alone. Those answers, if they come, will come from timing, access, and behavior, elements you will see tested in the upcoming movement analysis. The human layer is short and specific. Families and classrooms do not prepare for this kind of violence. The impact is immediate and long-lasting, but the evidence still requires cold precision. Holding both truths is part of responsible reporting to the public. The community deserves facts they can rely on and a process that earns trust. In towns like this, that is not just sentiment. It is the basis for whether people will come forward with information when asked. One line appears again in investigator notes because it keeps professionals from cutting corners. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. When the story looks tidy, test it harder. Here, that means checking whether the time window can truly accommodate a return to the house, a close-range discharge in a confined space, and an exit without detection. That is not speculation. It is the direct handoff from forensics to timeline. As we move into movement and minutes, consider a practical question to ground your view. If the shot is contact range and the weapon never surfaces, what single piece of timing or access information would most change your mind about who could have done this? Forensics set an afternoon bracket. Now the clock has to carry it. The goal is simple and strict. Test whether any person could leave a public place with a child, reach the house, create the closet scene established by the lab, and be somewhere else again, without breaking what we already know. Investigators start by pinning verified stop points, not rumors. Paper beats memory, so receipts, cashier logs, and any available surveillance timestamps form the spine. Where a receipt gives a time, that becomes a fixed peg. Where a clerk can confirm a lane was open, or a register tape matches a purchase, that peg strengthens. The route between pegs is mapped in both directions with conservative and optimistic drive times. This is Katy, Texas, on a school day afternoon. Lights, school zones, and parking friction are part of the math. Nothing in this phase argues motive. It only asks, could the movement fit the window the forensic work just defined? Traffic assumptions are treated as evidence, not convenience. Baseline travel is pulled from real drive conditions matching date and hour. school dismissal patterns, common bottlenecks, and ordinary stoplight cycles. Investigators run two models. The first is a best-case path where lights favor the driver, lines are short, and loading a child takes as little time as safely possible. The second is a real-world path that includes checkout delays, seatbelts, doors, and the predictable costs of parking and reparking. Either model must respect the fact that the scene was not a quick smash and grab. It was a contact-range discharge inside a closet, followed by an exit that left no weapon behind. Where surveillance exists, even in partial frames, it is used to cap uncertainty, not to tell a story. A timestamp showing a vehicle at a store at a certain minute is hard data. A witness who places a familiar face at a counter around then is soft data until matched to a register tape. The team logs both, labels both, but does not give them equal weight. 5 minutes either way can decide whether a person could have done this or couldn't have, and that difference can be the whole case if the rest of the evidence is neutral. Family errands introduce unique timing variables that need to be written down instead of assumed. Buckling or unbuckling a child, walking at a child's pace, and moving in and out of stores are small tasks that add up. An aggressive model that omits these steps is a shortcut, not an analysis. A careful model that includes them may still leave a narrow window measured in tens of minutes, not hours. If a window exists at all, its size and shape must be consistent with what the scene tells us. A single close-range discharge, no second impact, no recovered weapon, and a back entry whose glass pattern is already under scrutiny. Witness statements are read against the clock, not the other way around. A neighbor who cites a vehicle sound or a presence near a fence line is helpful only if the time can be anchored to a second fact, like a phone call they placed, a TV program that started, or a receipt they printed close to that moment. A cashier who remembers an interaction becomes present tense when the register tape backs them up. Investigators teach themselves to ignore confident memories that float without a timestamp. Confidence is not competence. Paper and clocks are. The absence of telematics in 1999 matters. There are no car GPS trails to mine, no smartphone location histories to cross-check. That forces a disciplined reliance on analog breadcrumbs, receipts, store logs, drive time tests, repeated under similar conditions, and the integrity of the scene. Where some modern cases lean on metadata, this one leans on repetition, running the route more than once at the same time of day to see how often the best case is even possible. If a path only works when every light is green and every line is empty, that tells you something. If it works often enough to be ordinary, that tells you something else. A useful test is to flip the script, assume the movement could not have happened. What would you need to see, physically, to rule it in anyway? A purchase that pushes the person past the forensic bracket. A surveillance pull that places the relevant vehicle out of range during the only feasible minutes. A credible witness with a time-stamped anchor who places critical parties elsewhere. If those don't appear, the impossibility claim is weak. If they do, the opportunity claim collapses. The clock is impartial. It cuts whichever way the facts direct. There is also the issue of the missing weapon. If a return to the house was part of this path, a long gun had to be present, accessed, or carried by someone with a plan to remove it or abandon it elsewhere. That reality leans the analysis toward access and familiarity in later segments, but here it functions as a time cost. Retrieving, using, disposing, and leaving. All steps take minutes. Modeling that truth keeps the window honest. A scenario that leaves no time for the weapon problem is not a scenario, it's a wish. The human layer remains short and necessary. Communities live by routines, homicide breaks them. When daily routes become evidence, people feel exposed. Respecting that is part of ethical reporting and competent investigation. In towns like this, neighbors help when they trust the process. They're more likely to share small details that tighten or relax the window when they understand those details matter. Everything you've just heard leads to a sober checkpoint. If the window exists, it is narrow. If it doesn't, the case has to look somewhere else for answers. In either outcome, the next move is the same. Pressure test the alternative lane that was examined early on. Who else might have had both access and time? The analysis will be presented with the same restraint used here. If the clock can't carry an inside job, the analysis has to open the other door, the neighborhood lane. This isn't rumor, it's a structured pass through proximity, opportunity, and time. Investigators rewalk fences and alleys behind the house, chart sightlines to the rear entry, and map how someone local could approach and leave without drawing attention on a school day afternoon. The canvas log focuses on a tight radius, addresses within quick walking distance, especially those with line of sight to the backyard or knowledge of the family's routines. Leads narrow to a teenage male who lived nearby at the time. His name and circumstances surfaced in police reports and later court filings, so the scrutiny was not an afterthought. The question was always the same. Could he have intersected the forensic bracket set by the closet without colliding with the time pegs tied to errands and witness placements? Investigators pull school attendance, check for any documented movements that day, and compare those records to canvas statements. The standard stays high. Unsupported impressions are parked. Only anchored facts move forward. Physical evidence is tested first because it's where alternate lanes most often break. The rear entry is checked for usable prints and footwear impressions. Nothing decisive emerges. No recovered property connects to an outside burglar. There is no pellet strike or secondary pattern outside the closet to support a chaotic struggle that might suggest a stranger confrontation. The absence of those ties doesn't clear the lane. Absence rarely does. But it keeps the burden where it belongs. The alt path must earn its way in with more than a possibility. Timing is the next cut. Attendance logs are examined for that afternoon, statements from friends and family are recorded, and then tested for an anchor. Phone records, a store receipt, a time-stamped activity. Some claims align with the bracket, others don't. Where a statement floats, it's labeled as such and not allowed to outweigh the fixed pegs already in the case. The goal is simple. See whether a neighborhood approach could match the quiet needed to enter a home, deliver a contact-range shotgun discharge in a closet, and exit without taking anything and without being seen. Access analysis also matters. A random burglar usually tests doors and windows where escape lines are best. A neighbor with knowledge may pick a route that avoids exposure to the street. Investigators evaluate gates, fence heights, and the practicalities of carrying or accessing a long gun in that space. The weapon's absence complicates every version of events, but it imposes a special cost on any outsider theory. If a teen or anyone else brought a 12-gauge, they had to transport it in and out without drawing notice in daylight, or stash it nearby in a way that left no trace later. That's not impossible. It is a significant logistical claim that asks for corroboration. Years later, this lane would matter for another reason: disclosure. When the first trial was overturned on Brady grounds, part of the discussion involved material about the neighborhood theory and whether it had been fully and timely shared. That reversal did not declare anyone innocent. It required the process to reset so a jury could hear the evidence with the missing pieces on the table. In the 2019 retrial, they did. The neighborhood lane, its strengths and its gaps, was aired in open court. Jurors waited alongside the closet reconstruction and the time and movement models already in this record. The human piece here is brief but important. Alternate suspect lanes can wreck lives if handled carelessly, especially when young people are involved. Ethics demands two things at once: take the possibility seriously and refuse to make it a scapegoat when the proof doesn't reach the mark. That discipline protects the innocent and strengthens cases that do go to verdict because the public can see that every plausible door was opened and tested. By the close of this review, the neighborhood lane remained what the paperwork shows it to be: examined, documented, and limited by the same standards applied to every other theory. No decisive physical tie. A timing picture that could be argued, but not anchored to the degree the law requires when a homicide is tried years later before a jury. With that record set, the case turns to the why prosecutors would eventually present and the counter-argument the defense would raise, because motive, tested against forensics and time, is the next load-bearing beam. Motive is where prosecutors say the story makes sense and where defense counsel warns juries not to fill gaps with feelings. In this case file, the why arrives after the closet forensics, the time and movement work, and the neighborhood lane have already been tested. Only then do attorneys ask a different question. If the inside path was possible and the outside path was weak, what pressure inside the home could explain the act? Public records describe a relationship that formed in late 1998 between David Temple and a colleague. Prosecutors framed it as forward-looking pressure. A married man on the edge of a new romance while his wife, Belinda Temple, was 8 months from a second child. That framing matters because motive theories in domestic homicides often lean on future plans. What changes if the current family structure ends, and what changes if it doesn't? The state's narrative tied those plans to opportunity and to the way the house looked the day Belinda was killed. Their claim wasn't that motive proved guilt, it was that motive fit the physical and chronological picture already established. The defense answered in plain terms: infidelity is evidence of bad judgment, not murder. No shotgun was recovered. No direct physical trace tied a specific weapon to David Temple. The neighbor lane had been investigated for a reason. A possibility cannot be erased because it is inconvenient. When testimony turned to conduct around the time of the pregnancy, counsel pushed back on the state's suggestion of a single, inevitable arc. People make poor choices and still do not commit homicide. The law requires proof that clears more than suspicion. Investigators, for their part, kept the spine straight. The closet forensics and the clock don't bend for anyone's narrative. Still, motive is not window dressing. It explains why a staged break-in hypothesis might exist at all. It explains why someone would risk a contact range discharge inside a private space and then leave without taking valuables. In simple language, the more personal the motive, the less a theft story is needed. That inference is allowed. It just isn't enough by itself. Witnesses filled in ordinary life details that lawyers later argued about. Statements on demeanor, schedules, and plans for the near future. None of those statements changed the fixed points. They did, however, give jurors context for the choices adults were making in late 1998 and early January 1999. In trials that hinge on circumstantial mosaics, context can be the line between could be and is. It must still be measured against everything nailed down by science and time. There is a discipline worth repeating once. When a story seems to align too cleanly, test it harder. Here, that means the why can only travel as far as the lab and the clock carry it. If the motive theory outruns either, it fails. If it rests on them and they hold, the case moves. Courtrooms turn hypotheses into records. In 2007, Harris County prosecutors assembled the case in a sequence a jury could track. The closet forensics fixed where and how. The clock test argued there was time to act. The motive theory explained why a staged break-in story would ever be necessary. Each pillar was tied to sworn testimony, exhibits, and chain of custody logs built to survive cross-examination. Jurors first heard from the medical examiner and crime scene technicians. The testimony stayed close to measurements, not impressions: a single contact range 12-gauge discharge in the master bedroom closet, plastic wadding consistent with a hunting load, posture indicators consistent with the victim low to the floor at impact, no second impact zone, no firearm recovered. Analysts described glass characteristics at the back door and why the directionality didn't read like a typical exterior strike. The language was clinical, and it stayed that way because jurors don't need adjectives to understand physics. Timing witnesses followed. The state laid out receipts, cashier logs, and verified timestamps to show a narrow, workable window on January 11, 1999. Investigators had run best case and real-world models. Prosecutors leaned on the common elements where both models allowed a round trip with a child and the actions inside the house. Where memory conflicted with paper, the state told jurors to trust paper. The theory was simple. The lab built the bracket. The clock carried it. Only then did prosecutors turn to motive. Public records about a late 1998 relationship were presented as context for forward-looking decisions, not as proof by themselves. The state argued that a personal motive, aligned with the closet reconstruction and the workable window, made the fake break-in thesis coherent. Valuables left in place, a point-blank shot in a private space, and a missing weapon that had to be accessed and removed. The message was, motive didn't convict. Motive fit what the measurements already showed. The defense answered with the same three handles, inverted. On forensics, counsel emphasized what wasn't found. No recovered shotgun, no direct physical trace tying a specific weapon to David Temple. On time, they pressed every friction point: school zones, checkout delays, the reality of moving with a child, arguing that the window was too tight outside of optimistic assumptions. On motive, they told jurors infidelity is poor judgment, not homicide. And they pressed the neighborhood lane. A teen nearby had been examined for a reason. The absence of a decisive physical tie didn't erase the possibility of an outsider. Cross-examination sharpened the edges. Analysts reaffirmed chain of custody and the limits of their conclusions. Range proves proximity, not identity, but they did not retreat from the core reconstruction. Timing witnesses acknowledged variability but defended the anchored pegs built on receipts and logs. The trial judge instructed the jury on circumstantial evidence. If separate facts, considered together, exclude reasonable doubt, the law allows a conviction. After deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict for murder. David Temple was sentenced to life in prison. The court remanded him to custody. For Belinda Temple's family, it read like closure. For the record, it was a waypoint. Years later, appellate review would scrutinize disclosure obligations and ultimately reset the process, not the facts the jury heard. That's for the next segment. What happened in this one is fixed. The state tied science, time, and motive. The defense attacked each link. The jury chose. The verdict in 2007 did not end this case. Years later, Texas's highest criminal court ruled that the first trial was compromised by Brady disclosure failures. The order did not rewrite the facts fixed at the scene. It reset the process. A new jury would have to hear everything, this time with the contested material on the table, so the record could stand on its own. In 2019, the state rebuilt the case in the same order you followed. The closet reconstruction anchored where and how the killing happened. The time and movement analysis showed a workable window on January 11, 1999. The neighborhood lane was presented fully, including why it had drawn early attention and where it fell short. And the motive theory, grounded in late 1998 relationship evidence, was offered as context rather than proof by itself. Defense counsel pressed the same fault lines. No recovered shotgun, no direct tie to a specific weapon, timing friction, and the outsider theory. Experts reaffirmed range, posture, and wadding findings and defended chain of custody. Jurors, instructed on how circumstantial mosaics can satisfy the law when the pieces fit, returned a second guilty verdict. Punishment was litigated in a separate proceeding. In April 2023, after the resentencing process concluded, David Temple received life in prison. The sentence reflected what the evidence had supported from the start: a single contact range 12-gauge blast in a private space, valuables left, forced entry inconsistent with an exterior break, and a weapon that never surfaced. The legal questions had been argued twice. The physical facts had not moved. Appeal followed, as it should in a case this serious. On July 1, 2025, the Intermediate Appellate Court affirmed the conviction and sentence. The opinion did what appellate courts are supposed to do: measure the sufficiency of the proof, test how the trial court handled disputed issues, and decide whether a rational jury could find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It concluded that the record, taken as a whole, cleared that bar. With ordinary post-conviction avenues still available in theory, the practical posture of this case is settled. The jury's answer stands. There is a human ledger that doesn't fit neatly into transcripts. Belinda Temple was a teacher, a mother, and a daughter whose name has been spoken in courtrooms for more than 2 decades because a January afternoon in Katy, Texas never made sense as a burglary. The community's patience, witnesses repeating statements, agencies preserving evidence, courts retrying a case to cure process errors, formed a second kind of proof that accuracy matters more than speed. In towns like this, justice isn't just a verdict. It's the willingness to test a neat story until the measurements hold. If there is a takeaway worth keeping, it is small and practical. Domestic space homicides often hide behind staged scenes. The only antidote is method. Lock the physical facts, build timelines from paper, not memory, and let motive explain rather than decide. That is how an investigation survives years of scrutiny and still tells the same story at the end. Looking back at Belinda Temple's story, I'm reminded that justice takes patience, persistence, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Her life and the long fight for accountability show us how fragile safety can be even in the places we call home. My hope is that her story inspires us to pay closer attention to the signs of strain in our families and communities and to never overlook them. What do you think this case teaches us about trust and resilience? If this video touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. And if you want more true stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.